Hi, I'm Coach Kel, and welcome to today's mental fitness video, part of our ongoing series in which we take a look at everyday mental challenges and discuss tools from psychology and neuroscience that can help. I got an email from a friend of mine that's running low on mental energy. He's a hard worker with a successful career and a young family. He's pushing hard, but he's feeling like his energy levels are just low. So let's help him out. And so he writes, Coach Cal, I would love to figure out how to find the mental energy and work-life balance during the week to work on my physical activity. I only have to drive into work 2 to 3 times per week, but when I do, since it's about 60 miles each way, I leave my house at 5 a.m. When I get home, deal with more work, kids' activities, and so on, I have to be in bed around 8:45 to 9:15 p.m. Otherwise, I'm nearly dead at the end of the week. I wish I had the energy like in the old days. What can I do to help fix this? It sounds like what my friend is struggling with is simply that limit on vitality that we have when we're really consistently busy. That makes sense in today's world, where it seems like it's the rule more than the exception, that we're pushing our human performance in multiple dimensions every day, and that's before the efforts we put into supporting the development of our young families. In any case, in these situations where we feel like we're not getting the performance we want out of ourselves, there's a rational approach we can take to ensure we're not missing anything foundational from a mental health perspective. Now, I won't cover the deep details of each one here. This video would get really long if I did, but they're simple enough to help begin the process of asking good questions of ourselves and getting some of our own ideas. And I have to give Dr. Andrew Huberman credit for the approach. If you haven't checked out his Huberman Lab podcast, you're really missing out. The approach is simple. If we're going to change something about our life status quo, we want to make sure that we're not missing any underlying factors. That way we don't end up chasing our tails. Now, before you start anything, you need to know where you stand. Get a blood test. I've heard InsideTracker.com is a great place to get results and explanations of the various levels of nutrients and hormones on the blood test panel. This is essential because there could be something you're missing that is not obvious that could be having a very powerful effect on your life. Ask me how I know. And once you know where you stand, start assessing and making changes in your life in this order. First, behavioral changes. And the first step of this section is always making sure that we are getting good sleep. Bad sleep will distort or prevent the positive effects of any other change that we make. Good sleep is the bedrock of mental health. There's no way around it. Next, nutritional change. What you eat absolutely matters. Then, supplemental change. So adding a supplement of some kind to address a natural deficiency we have that behavior and nutritional changes cannot address. Then, finally, medicinal change. Sometimes prescription drugs are just necessary for different areas of mental health. I'm a living example. I was diagnosed with ADHD in November of 2021, and although I've made incredible strides with behavioral and nutritional improvements, there are times when, to live life with vitality, I simply need to take some type of dopamine reuptake inhibitor to overcome the overaggressive dopamine reuptake that I have genetically. The point is, when we're talking about prescription drugs, we should try to keep them as a last resort. So let's tailor this approach to my friend. I'll assume he's at least getting good sleep and eating varied, healthy, and unprocessed foods. He mentions mental energy for physical activity. From a neuroscience perspective, that's a key statement. And the reason why is because our old friend dopamine is responsible for both. Dopamine's a limited but renewable resource. We have an amount of dopamine that's ready to release, and we lean on our supply of ready-to-release dopamine throughout the day. Now, relaxation and sleep allow our brains to refill the dopamine tank. As you would expect, our readily releasable dopamine tends to be highest at the start of the day after getting quality sleep. And it's easy to see why dopamine would make us feel like we have mental energy. It is the motivation hormone. The discomforts of exhaustion and distraction fade away when our dopamine is high. That's a big part of what it does. It creates a mental state of goal-oriented thought and action. Dopamine has another role as well. It's actually responsible for our physical movement. It's more complex than I'll explain here, but the expression of dopamine in certain parts of our brain is an early part of the process of muscular contraction. And here's a wild related fact. The motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease result from the death of cells that supply dopamine to the part of our brain that controls voluntary muscle movements. Essentially, every time we move, that uses up some dopamine. Anytime we place our attention spatially outside of our own bodies, that's an expression of dopamine as well. And driving makes us constantly distribute our attention to spatial points all around us. And what do you think happens when we get to work? We want to perform well, or at least not lose our job. So we select and act along multiple short-term and long-term goals. That is the absolute essence of dopamine utilization. After a full day of work, it's time to drive home again. Once we get home, we use more dopamine to focus our attention to engage with our families. And that's if we're lucky enough to not have more work to do. Finally, and typically, a mental energy trap is set. And that's the temptation that goes hand in hand with the sensation of the need to unwind, which for most of us takes the form of watching some TV we enjoy. Does it feel good? Yes, especially after a stressful day. Sometimes we just want to sink into the couch and watch the game or some indulgent reality TV. But what do you think happens when we start watching a show that we're very interested in? Yep, more dopamine use. And looking back through this typical day, what do you think happens during those little gaps of attention where we open up social media and check our phones? Do I even need to say it at this point? So between waking up, prepping ourselves, driving an hour to work, working hard all day, driving an hour home, taking care of our families, and finally getting the chance to unwind with something we enjoy, where do you think our level of dopamine is at the end of that? Probably very low, creating a brain state that's very aware of our physical exhaustion and mental distraction. And here's the thing, just because we got a night of quality sleep after all of that, does not necessarily mean that our dopamine tank is fully refilled. This is part of how we tend to feel more exhausted at the end of a Friday than at the end of the previous Monday. We're using it faster than we can recharge it over the work week, and it's possible we're making up the difference just on the weekends. Though for someone with a young family, they might be using just as much or more dopamine on a Saturday or Sunday as they did on any weekday. So what the heck is my friend supposed to do if every minute of every day seems to use up dopamine? Here's what I would suggest. Set a goal to make dopamine the precious mental resource that it is by finding opportunities to conserve it. That might mean a mix of integrating slightly less dopamine-intensive things into our daily behaviors while switching up some others completely. Let's run through the approach. First, blood test. Don't skip this step. Do it. For behavioral change, find sections of the day where dopamine can be conserved or restored without too much disruption. That means protecting your sleep, maybe listening to relaxing music or even nothing on the way to work and on the way home. Maybe integrating a 10-minute non-sleep deep rest session somewhere into the middle of the day. That can have very beneficial effects. I'll include a link to Andrew Huberman's NSDR YouTube script that does this. All you need is a place to sit down, throw on some headphones, and close your eyes undisturbed. And instead of throwing ourselves into the old winding down trap where we use dopamine to watch something stimulating on TV, try doing something only mildly interesting, like an easy book read. No page turners though. Or if you really want to switch it up, try doing virtually nothing at all, like a very low-focus, relaxed breathing session or a walk outside with a quiet mind. A more intense version of this might be to assign one of the weekend days to be a strictly low-activity, low-stimulation day. And I know this next one is a really big change, but it might be worth considering moving closer to work. Spending 6 hours a week driving is a very heavy use of dopamine and time for that matter, and more of both would make getting a workout in easier. I know that's big, but it might just be worth it. Nutritionally, just make sure you're eating right, unless the blood test says that you're deficient somewhere, in which case try to correct it with food rich in those nutrients. You can also bias your diet towards foods high in tyrosine, which is one of the metabolic building blocks of dopamine. As supplements go, L-tyrosine and phenylethylamine are supplements that can help support dopamine levels. But again, try this after the blood test, behavioral changes, and nutritional changes. Don't chase your tail. And if none of that works, it's individual medical advice time, because we're getting into prescriptions, and that's way beyond the scope of this video. Those adjustments are a few that could really help dopamine levels, and that should help with the energy that my friend is looking for. Now, finding the time for a workout, that's another separate challenge, but the extra dopamine will help with figuring that out. I will say that once he does find time for a workout, since workouts use a lot of dopamine, try to keep them at a moderate level at most. The classic exercise for mental health target is 180 minutes per week of zone 2 cardio, which is where you're just having trouble holding a conversation. That amount carries significant health benefits without using every ounce of dopamine we have and putting us back at square one. And you don't have to get 180, but try. And that's a good segue to make some quick points on mindset. It's just a part of life that our physical and cognitive abilities slowly decline as we get older. It's also a part of life that, well, life happens. And none of this should be taken as an absolute rule. What I'm saying is, allow yourself some room to not be perfect at your own plan and to just be tired sometimes. The power of the belief that what you're doing in life is enough has significant, tangible, positive neurobiological effects, including more dopamine capacity. Overall, in terms of mindset, a great goal to have is not to live a life of perfection or flawless performance, but a life of vitality, where we push for results, but we're satisfied with the input. If you want to learn some more cool things about mindset, including the one key ingredient for a mindset to be effective, check out my previous video on positive self-talk. There's a lot of powerful information there. I'll put a link at the end and in the video description. That's what I have for today. If you have a question about a mental challenge you're having, send me a brief email at autonomy@outlook.com, and I'll see if I can help with a video about your topic. By the way, these tools to increase dopamine are part of a much wider set of foundational mental fitness courses for individuals and companies that I teach. I developed these courses from various studies in high-quality, peer-reviewed academic journals. I'm a practitioner, I literally practice what I preach, and I was able to use them to reduce my ADHD medication regimen by 90% while increasing focus, mental endurance, and holistic quality of life. If these tools can help me increase my natural focus and mental fitness by that much, I'm very confident that they can help you and your team. If that sounds interesting to you, again, feel free to send me an email at autonomycoachkel@outlook.com. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.